To those of you who've been here before, welcome back. And to those of you who are just finding this, welcome. You've kind of landed in the middle of something big and multi-handed. This is actually part 8 of my most anticipated games of 2022, part 8, in an 8-video series. So if you're kind of stumbling upon this video for the first time, you may want to go back to part 1 and start there. And you can watch videos that talk about my honorable mentions, my 50 most anticipated expansions, and kind of later editions of games that have already existed before. And then once I hit video 4, I start doing 20 games per video. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's the 5th video in that part of the series and the last group of 20 games. Today's group of games is going to start with a game called Skyrise. So we're starting at the SKs and we'll go to the end of the alphabet. And please don't forget to like and subscribe, particularly if you like what you're seeing and you want to subscribe and see more of this kind of content. I'm going to run some music with some of the covers from some of the games that I'm going to be talking about, and then I'll get right into talking about the first game, Skyrise. So I first created this list back in late 2021, early 2022, and since I created the list, some things have changed. I mean, we've already been living in a world where there's production delays because of COVID, distribution delays, all kinds of delays. So everything just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. That means that from when I created the list, a few of these games, the delivery has been pushed back into 2023. It hasn't happened too much because we're still early on in the year, so a lot of those games that are intended to deliver at the end of the year, they haven't hit the point yet where they know that there will be delays. But the first game that I wanted to talk to you about today, Skyrise, I had heard about this and I thought it was going to be launching on Kickstarter maybe the end of 2021, certainly the beginning of 2022. But now as I'm recording this, we're almost halfway through April and it still hasn't launched on Kickstarter. In fact, I don't think there's actually been a date released for when it will launch. So it's unlikely, it's very, very unlikely that this game will, go to crowdfunding, be funded, and then deliver in 2022. So this is one of the games that most likely is now being pushed into 2023. Yet I'm 80 games into this list and I'm not going to alter the list at this point. So we're just going to talk about the games that made the list. And in this case, we've got a little exception here. It may not deliver until 2023 or even later. Who knows? Who knows at this point in time? So we don't know the Kickstarter date for this game yet. Whether or not I will back it, I'm unsure. There's not that much information, but it is something that very much has my curiosity because of the artist and the publisher involved. And then as far as when it delivers, again, that's just TBA. We don't know. There's no way to know at least until the Kickstarter launches. Then we'll have a window, we'll have a target date, but even that could be pushed back with all of the production delays and distribution chain delays that have been happening over the last year or two. What I do know is that Skyrise is a standalone sequel to a game named Metropolis. It's a city building game and it's got auction and bidding as a central mechanic. Now, the artist on this game is Andrew Bosley. He's worked on titles like Caelus 1303, that's the newer version of Caelus, Everdell, Merchants of the Dark Road, Tapestry, and most recently a game called Vivid Memories that just delivered in January that I'm going to be talking about later in this video. If you've played Everdell or Tapestry, you know his art, and he has a very engaging, inviting, fun art style, lots of cute characters. And the game's being published by Roxley, who's done the most recent Brass games, Birmingham and Lancashire, the Dice Throne series, Radlands, Santorini, and Steampunk Rally. So in my mind, we've got a really, really good, engaging artist with one of the better publishers out there. So I'm really curious about what this game is going to end up being. City building, auction, and bidding. It feels like it's going to be on the lighter side to me based on those kinds of mechanics, but I like a lot of the creative people involved with this one. So I need more information. I'm excited about it now at the outset, and we'll see what happens when the game gets a specific launch date and we get more information about it. But for now, it is certainly on my radar, and that's Skyrise. Next up, I'm going to talk about a game called So You've Been Eaten, which I think has one of the best titles out there. I mean, that is an awesome title that I think could just sell the game alone. Now, this game was on Kickstarter in March of 2021. It's not a game that I personally backed for a couple of reasons. Mainly, it's a solo game, although it can be played with 2 players. It also has this distinction of a game that can be played with 0 players. You literally could have kind of the 2 AI parts of the game battle themselves, although why you'd want to do that, I don't know. But while I find the theme really interesting, the name is great, the art, we'll get to that in a minute, looks awesome, it just didn't seem like it was a game that specifically would appeal to me enough that I'd want to back it. And I think I was probably pledging a lot of other things at the time. So it unfortunately got pushed to the wayside. But I'm really curious about this game. I really want to check it out. It was originally going to deliver in October of 2021, but things get pushed back. That seems to be a common rule these days. And so now it is targeted to deliver in May of this year. So thematically, it features this kind of futuristic miner, I think in a space-themed setting, and he's been consumed by this giant space worm, I think, and he needs to dig his way out. So he's trying to collect these crystals within the digestive tract of the beast. And once he does that, he'll essentially win the game and be able to escape. Meanwhile, this giant worm is going to assault him with all of these immune responses and bacteria, and it's literally trying to digest the miner. So if it's able to kind of attach 4 different kinds of bacteria types to him, the worm will win the game. And you can play the miner against the worm, you can play the worm against the miner, you can do a 2-player game, or as I mentioned before, I guess if you just want to watch the game run itself, you can make that happen. Now, it's designed by Scott Almes, who does a lot of the tiny epic games, and I've come to notice over time that those just aren't the games for me. They're a little too light for my taste. I want more going on in my games than I feel is offered in terms of choices and the impact that those choices make. So that was one thing that kept me from backing. But it does have art from Kwanchai Maria, who is one of my favorite artists out there. Anytime he's involved in a game, his art just elevates it. He's worked on games like Cryptid, Dinosaur Island, In the Hall of the Mountain King, the latest version of Sidereal Confluence, and Under Falling Skies. And he has a very kind of thick-lined art. It reminds me of some of the art from the reboot of the Challengers of the Unknown comic book back, I think, in the 90s. But just great thick line work, really striking, colorful characters and landscapes, the kind of things you'd want to have on a poster or in your game. Just fantastic art. And I think with a theme like this, his art is going to be perfectly utilized. So this game kind of lands as something that I'm really interested to check out. I'd like to give it a couple plays, but I'm not sure if it's going to be right for me and my collection in the long term. But with this theme being as unique as it is, it's something I'm really looking forward to experiencing. Which brings me to a game called Soul Raiders, which ran on Kickstarter in August of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed. So this is a game that could and probably will be pushed back into 2023, especially when you just accept the fact that almost every game has had delays of a few more months than usual. I think in general, Kickstarter games tend to usually have a couple month delay, but once we hit COVID and global pandemic and all of those kinds of backups, games typically have been delayed 6 to 9 months from their initial, the announcement of when they're going to deliver. So this is one of the games that may end up being delivered, although for now, at this point in time, they're still saying it's going to deliver in December of 2022. Now, I think this is one that maybe a lot of people don't remember or didn't back, and it flew a little bit more under the radar. The reason that I was interested in it is that it's designed by Marc-Andre, who did Majesty for the Realm and Splendor. And it's a story-driven exploration game. It's cooperative. It's got miniatures in it. It's one of these big campaign games. And I love those. I love to play those. My fiance, Kristen, also likes those. She's not a huge fan of competitive games. So one of the sweet spots for us are cooperative campaign games that we can play together. I know that this one was in development for many years. I don't have a specific figure, but it's just stated that it was in development for many years. And they were trying to craft something that is very approachable so that newer gamers can kind of come into it and not be overwhelmed, yet something that has really deep, rich gameplay and choices of impact. And that kind of design philosophy, plus knowing the development that had gone into it previously, I think is part of what got me excited. If it's a game that's very approachable, yet it's still very immersive and has really deep gameplay, I think that's a game that will work really well for Kristen and myself. And I'll talk about this more at the end of the video, but something I am planning on doing before the end of this year is launching a Twitch channel. And one of the things that I want to feature heavily on the Twitch channel are campaign games. I think those are games that are fun to play. They're very involving. You can kind of build a community around that. And not everyone has the time to play campaign games, but some people like to see what it's all about, particularly if they're thinking about buying it. They can get a taste of it and then know if it's for them or not. And that's often something that you want to do before you make a bigger commitment to a game, which campaign games kind of require just by their nature. And so I have been thinking often when I'm back in games within the last year or two, is this a game that I'd want to feature on a Twitch channel? And I think something like this sounds perfect for it. And I think also the fact that it didn't blow up and become hugely popular means that when I hopefully get to play it, I'll be able to share a game that's not kind of being glutted out there with an audience, and they'll get a chance to see something that maybe they're not seeing other places. Now, I do know that the campaign, the storyline for this game is about 30 hours, 30 plus hours. And it's also been stated that it's not going to deep. And it's also been stated that it's not just going to be kind of a linear, repeatable experience, that when you play through that 30 hours of gameplay, you're not going to see everything. And that in order to really see everything and kind of fully experience the mechanics of the game that are deep and kind of open up the more you play, you probably will need about 3 runs through that campaign. So all of that has me very excited, and I'm interested to see what they do with this game. Splendor has always been a game that's very enticing to me. I just like the design of it, and that's a game that I could come back to again and again and not get bored or tired of it. And so I'm interested to see Marc-Andre's mind, what he came up with, knowing that he's the designer for Splendor, what he came up with mechanically for a storytelling exploration game like this. I'm very intrigued, and hopefully we'll see it this year or early next year, and it'll be a game that I get to share with you all at that time. SPECTRE the board game is another very interesting curiosity on this list, I think. I've heard a lot of talk about it, and now talk seems to have stalled. So I'm not sure what's happening with this game at this point in time. It's supposed to be a retail game. It was originally earmarked, I think, for spring 2022. But the thing is, all of these delays that are kind of happening worldwide, not even just in board gaming, but in all kinds of supply chains, those are affecting retail games as well, because those games need to be produced and then distributed too. It's not just the Kickstarter industry. And talk about this one has gone a little bit dark, but let me tell you why I'm intrigued by it and excited for it, potentially, assuming that it does still get made and it gets produced sometime within this year, maybe next year. So there's a group of 4 designers, and they've taken on kind of a team name of Kadama, which is, I think, a word that actually refers to noodle dishes. Like if you order ramen and you want to refill just of the noodles, I believe that's called Kadama. So that's what they took as their kind of name. One of those designers is Antoine Bauza, who you probably know from the Seven Wonders games, the original game and Seven Wonders Duel, as well as Takanoko. And he's also the designer behind Ghost Stories and Hanabi. That group is also made of Corentin Lebrat, who worked on a game called Draftosaurus, Theo Riviere, who's worked on Draftosaurus, The Loop, and Unlock Epic Adventures, and Ludovic Montblanc, who's worked on Cash and Guns, Draftosaurus, Conan, Cyclades, and Mr. Jack. So you've got this team of 4 designers, some of whom have worked on some really influential titles. And then you've got 3 other designers with Modiphius Entertainment, that's the publisher. And so these 7 designers were working together on this game. Now, that team I already mentioned, Kodama. They worked on a game called Arceus that was on Kickstarter a couple of years ago. I believe it delivered last year. And that was a cooperative game. It focused on a team of explorers. So I believe there's variable player powers involved. And they're exploring Egyptian ruins. I don't believe it's quite a dungeon crawler, but it has a little bit of that feel. It's cooperative, it's story-driven, it's a campaign game, it's got miniatures, a lot of things that I like in a game. Now, when that game was on Kickstarter, there were several games like it at the time, including Ankh, I think. And for whatever reason, you can't back everything. I mean, that's something that all of us need to, I think, realize and specifically pick what games it is that we're adding to our collection. You can't have everything. So Arceus was a game for me that I passed for a couple of reasons. If I'm remembering correctly, I think it was kind of expensive for what it was in my mind and probably a little bit lighter than what I wanted. And I think there were a lot of other games at the time. So I passed on Arceus, but I made note of that design team at the time. And that design team is, of course, now working on Spectre the board game along with those 3 other designers from Modiphius Entertainment. So that had me very interested from the get-go. But the other thing is the theme itself. So it's called Spectre the board game. It's based on James Bond as a theme, but in this game, all of the players are playing the great villains from James Bond's movies. And that just very much appealed to me. To be taking this kind of different tactic where you're not playing James Bond, you're not trying to complete missions. You are villains competing against other villains trying to be the best villain, the villain that can defeat James Bond and push out the other villains from that competition. And I thought that's a very unique theme that appealed to me. I'd love to play Blofeld in a game. I'd love to screw around with James Bond and compete against the other villains. So theme-wise, I thought it was very cool. And for whatever reason, it also made me think of The Godfather Corleone's Empire, which was a CMON game that bypassed Kickstarter and went straight to retail. And I think that game is just a wonderful game, maybe one of Eric Lang's best designs. It's kind of an area control, hand management game. It's got some unique mechanics. And it's this really great, lighter, heavily thematic area control game. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because it's an IP thing, this just reminded me of that. And I thought, wow, this has the potential to be the kind of, rich in theme game that goes right to retail and just does what it does very well, is probably nicely produced, but at the same time isn't suffering from the same kind of bloat that a lot of Kickstarters do. So I'm going to continue to keep my eyes peeled for this one. I hope we get some announcements soon on whether it's still going to be produced, if it's been canceled, and if it is going to be produced, when we can expect it. I think that based on what's happened in the past, we either will get an announcement that it'll be released this year, or maybe delayed into next year, or simply that it's been canceled. I don't think it's going to get pushed and pushed and pushed. From there, I'm going to talk to you about a game called Spring and Autumn Story of China that's actually waned a little bit in my interest since I first made the list. Now, this is a game that originally went up on GameFound in December of 2021. It didn't do that well and they canceled it. And then it came back on Kickstarter in March of this year. So very recently, just funded about a month ago. Now, this isn't a game that I personally backed. And when I originally included it on my list, it was because of the GameFound campaign. And at that time, it was going to deliver this year in 2022. When they relaunched in March on Kickstarter, that was no longer the case. The delivery date was pushed until 2023. So here I am now talking about a game that I'm not as interested in as I originally was, and is no longer a 2022 game. What can you do? But let's talk about it a little bit. So it's designed by Scott Demers, who worked on a game called Hellenica: Story of Greece. That game currently has a 7.9 rating on BGG. It's kind of a 3.5x dudes on a map, skirmishy type game, and it's themed around ancient Greece. I've heard good things about that game. It's a game that I considered backing way back when that was on Kickstarter, and it's one that just didn't quite make the cut for me. And I knew that this game was going to be themed more around China. It takes place in 800 BC. It's in China. So instead of dealing with ancient Greece, you are going to be warring Chinese dynasties. And I liked that change. And I also liked the fact that Scott was working with a previous design system and improving it and upgrading it for this new retheming. I wouldn't think of it as kind of a redesign so much as maybe an unofficial sequel, spiritual sequel. And oftentimes those kinds of projects really gain from everything that was learned with the previous games. And now, unlike Hellenica, which is a 3.5x game, and usually when that happens, what that means is that the combat, the extermination side, isn't as prevalent. They've kind of changed it a little bit because not everybody likes direct conflict. So there are gamers out there who do not want to play a 4X game because they don't want to have that kind of direct combat, that warring against each other. They like the exploring, they like developing up their civilization or their side and improving it and building an engine. And they like kind of building bases on the map and doing all those kinds of things, but they don't want that direct player combat. So occasionally you see different takes on 4X games that are 3X games, or sometimes that are called 3.5. So maybe there is some kind of combative element, but it's not quite full combat. And so it gets the label of 3.5X. I do know though, with this one, Hellenica was 3.5X game. This one is a pure 4X game. And I like that. I like having all of those systems fully utilized. So again, for me, knowing that this one was going to 4X, that was a positive. So at the end of the day, you're going to have a 4X game, dudes on a map, a civilization game, kind of warring, 800 BC China. The Kickstarter already happened. However, they are still doing late pledges. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, you may want to go and check it out. It's not going to retail. There are no plans for this to ever go to retail. So if you are not able to late pledge it right now, or if you find this video at some point in the future, you may still have an opportunity to get the game, but you'll need to go directly through Mr. B Games' website because they do plan on continuing to sell the game there, at least until they run out of copies. And that will be your only way to get the game in the future. I'm interested in the game. I want to see it. I want to see how it plays. I'd love to play it. It's just not something that I felt I had the space for in my ever-growing collection, or something that I felt would unseat some of the other games like that I haven't really liked. But I'm curious, I'd like to play it, and hopefully in 2023 now, maybe I'll get the chance to do that. From there, I'd like to talk about a game called Stationfall. Now this game was on Kickstarter in May of 2021. It is a game that I personally backed, and it is currently slated to deliver in June of this year. It's designed by Matt Eklund, who is Phil Eklund's son. And Phil Eklund, I think a lot of gamers have some problems with. He owns a company called Sierra Madre Games. He makes a lot of very complex games, but he has also done things like defended colonialism in his rule books. And so I think he is a designer that a lot of gamers increasingly want very little to do with. However, his son Matt Eklund, I don't think, shares all of those same beliefs or values. And Sierra Madre Games has a parent company called Ion Game Design, and it's interesting that while Matt has done design work for his father's company, Sierra Madre, in the past, he seems to be moving away from that. And so this game is now actually being published by Ion Game Design and not Sierra Madre. So there's some, I guess, drama kind of behind the scenes in the past because of that. But I still want to give Matt a shot and give this game a shot and not sort of hold the sins of the father against him. Now, the other thing that has me interested and excited about this game, if you look at the board, it looks almost like maybe Clinic, which is a hospital game, and it has different floors of the hospital kind of built on top of each other on the board, and then it uses 3D design to kind of depict that. So there's a big board for Stationfall that looks kind of like that. you almost need to look at the board a little bit to kind of see the layout and understand how it all works together. But part of the, I guess, charm of this game is that the space station is not well designed for living or for operational purposes. And then there's a huge cast of characters. There's like 30 different characters in this game. They all have miniatures, and you're going to be playing as one of these characters. And they all have very odd goals. And those goals can change by things that happen on the space station and their interaction with other characters. It's got a very interesting grab bag of mechanics. It's got things like hidden trader, it's got deduction, it's got action points. You're kind of moving around and doing things in the game. There's hidden victory points, there's roles with asymmetric powers and variable player powers, and there's some pick up and deliver just to kind of round things off, I guess, and give you a mechanic that's a little bit more straightforward. But there's a lot kind of happening behind the scenes in terms of what a certain character wants in terms of their goals and how they may go about it. It's also got a really cheeky sense of humor to it. Think Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where there may be a robot in the game who doesn't really trust people. Maybe one of his goals is to push some humans out of a trash chute. I'm not saying that's in the game, but that's the kind of thing that's in the game. Just very weird, disparate philosophies and motivations. And I think what is going to make this game so unique is the way that they kind of all combine. Think of a game like Nemesis, but without the aliens and a much larger group of very diverse humans and non-human characters, and this kind of weird mixed grab bag of a society and the way that they come together or don't in their goals. It almost feels, it's so crazy, it almost feels like it's a party game, but a heavy Euro. So I have a lot of friends who like heavy Euros, and I think this is a game that is really going to intrigue them. And for us, this may become kind of a party game experience. So I hope that Matt Eklund just blows this design out of the water and begins to make his own name for himself, apart from, his ties to his father. Because based on what I've seen of this game, and I looked at it very deeply during the Kickstarter when it was up there, there are a lot of brilliant ideas and a lot of crazy creativity behind this game. And I'm very intrigued and excited to receive this Kickstarter and finally get this game to the table. In March of 2021, Game Brewer had a game called Stroganov on Kickstarter. This is a game that I personally backed, and it is currently slated to deliver in May. So next month from the time that I'm filming this. Now, it's designed by Andreas Stedding, who did games like Firenze, Gugong, and Hansa Teutonica, which is an amazing game. You really need a high player count for that one, at least 3. 4 is probably better, but it's a great game of area control and route building, and it really kind of milks these interactive devices with a high player count. And mechanic-wise, it's kind of interesting. It's a worker placement game, but it's also referred to more as worker movement. It's got these great landscape tiles by an artist named Maciej Janik. He's worked on things like Detective: A Modern Crime board game Season 1, the original Pret-a-Porter back in the day, the most recent version of Stronghold Undead. They had a Kickstarter for that a couple of years ago. And more recently, he's worked on Dune House Secrets and another Game Brewer campaign for a game called Oak that just completed a little while ago on GameFound. The landscape tiles that he has made for this game, and just in general the art for Stroganov, is some of the most beautiful board game art I've ever seen. Now, it takes place in Siberia, and each round takes place over 4 seasons, so the 4 seasons of the year. And as a round goes on, players are making choices about their movement, different resources that they can utilize, like furs. They're hunting, they're doing various things. But it's a very interesting progression, the way that the worker placement evolves and the way that the kind of resources are managed as players are very slowly, over the course of 4 seasons a year, kind of migrating from one side of the board to the other. And it's all done with this backdrop of this really gorgeous art. So it was a game that really appealed to me, just kind of looking at it, and I liked some of these very unique mechanics. Now, if what I'm saying to you interests you, but it's not a game that you personally backed. They are going to have a new campaign for it later in the year, an expansion campaign. On top of that, if you like Game Brewer, if you like some of their other games, they have a subscription service where you can go to their website. I think it's $45 for a year, and then you get, I believe it's a 10% discount on all of the games that they do on crowdfunding for that year. Now, I recently did that for myself before I pledged Oak, which I did back, another one of their games. And the savings that I saw on Oak from doing that was $30. And that's one of their 4 campaigns. So if I were to back a second campaign, which I likely will do because I'll be backing the expansion for Stroganov, I should see savings just from those 2 games. Yet I like Game Brewer. I like their games a lot. So it's likely that I will back their other 2 campaigns this year as well. We'll have to see what it's for, what games it is. But based on their track record, based on all of their other games and the fact that I really like most of them, it's very likely I'll want to back, if not 4 games, at least 3. And like I said, I think I'm going to see savings after backing 2. So if you do like Game Brewer games, that's something to consider. The Stuff of Legend was on Kickstarter in October of 2021. This is another one that I did personally back, and it's currently slated to deliver in June of this year. Now, this one's designed by Kevin Wilson, who worked on multiple versions of Arkham Horror, I believe the 1st and the 3rd editions. He also worked on, I think, both Descents, the 1st and the 2nd, not the most recent Legends of the Dark, but the first 2 versions of that game. He's worked on Elder Sign. He's worked on, I think, most, if not all, versions of Fury of Dracula. But he's a designer who's worked on a lot of big games. And this game focuses on a world kind of like Toy Story. Players are playing different kinds of toys, but this is a very dark world that it's set in. So think if there's a stuffed teddy bear, it's probably a stuffed teddy bear that no longer has its eye, and he's threadbare. And in this game, the child, the owner of the toys, has been captured by the boogeyman. And so players are going to be playing various kind of, I think, beat up toys that are trying to rescue their child owner from the boogeyman. It's a cooperative game. It's got variable player powers to it. And for me, I think I just saw a game that would be great to stream on Twitch probably. But more than that, I think a game that both my fiance Kristen and I will really enjoy, between the theme and the mechanics and a very unique take on Toy Story. Three Sisters is a game that was on Kickstarter in April of 2021. It is a game that I personally backed. In fact, it has already delivered. It delivered in January of this year. And I've played it a few times. I've even talked about it on my channel in my Kickstarter weekly videos. Now, right now I haven't been doing a lot of game reviews. However, in my Kickstarter weekly videos, I will talk about games that I've played and even give those games ratings. I believe I have given Three Sisters a 7.5 as of now. It is a roll and write game designed by Ben Pinchback and Matt Riddle, who you may know from Fleet the Dice Game, and Wasteland Express Delivery Service. And it's got art from 2 artists, Marlies Behrens and Beth Sobel, and Beth Sobel is awesome. She's done a ton of stuff. Arboretum, Calico, Cascadia, Viticulture, Wingspan. She's an artist who, when she's working on a game, immediately I'm almost interested exclusively from her inclusion. So I've given Three Sisters a 7.5 rating. My fiance Kristen really loves it. She's given it a 9.0. And I believe right now it's sitting on Board Game Geek with an overall rating of 7.8. So it's a roll and write game. It's farming themed. If you want to hear me talk more about it, you can check out my Kickstarter weekly videos. But it has sort of dice drafting and action drafting through the dice that you're drafting, and a lot of interesting chaining of roll and write actions to score points in all kinds of different ways. Now, my only, I guess, worry about the game is that I believe my fiance has already kind of zeroed in on the winning strategies for Three Sisters. So it's a smaller game, it's fairly portable. I think it's something that we'll probably take when we travel and continue to play. And so as we play it on little mini vacations and things, I'm going to be continuing to test it to see if there are kind of alternate strategies or if she really has kind of zeroed in on the best strategy. And if she has, my rating may go down somewhat because I'd rather the game not be, just doing one thing to win. I'd rather it incorporate different kinds of strategies. So I'll let you know in my Kickstarter weekly videos as I play it more, how my feelings about that game evolve over time. But for right now, it is a fun little engaging roll and write that I've been very much enjoying and I'm looking forward to get back to in the future. Threetale is a very different kind of game from Three Sisters. It was originally on Kickstarter in October of 2021. This is one that I personally backed, and it is currently slated to deliver in September of this year. Now, this one is a cooperative adventure game. It's for 3 players, hence the name Threetale. It reminds me a lot of Destiny's, I think, in the kind of fantasy theming. However, Destiny's was a competitive game that was app-reliant. This is a cooperative game that is not app-reliant. So it's very much a story-driven exploration campaign game for a 3-player max player count, which is a very interesting player count, and I think part of what initially drew me to it. Now, it's got tableau building, card drafting, there are miniatures in the game, and it does kind of an interesting thing with time. So in rounds of the game, you've got a prophecy phase, and then you've got a past, a present, and a future. So you'll be doing things in the prophecy phase where you're trying to predict what's going to happen later in the game. And then in the past phase, you'll kind of be building up your character and readying some things. And then in the present phase, you'll see which of those prophecies actually do come true, and you'll be dealing with them and resolving them into the future. So the whole kind of mechanical system of the game, and the fact that it was designed for 3 players cooperatively, really intrigued me. And again, I think it's a game that will be really good to stream on Twitch and really fun for us to play. And I think this is another game that didn't blow up out of the water. So when we are playing it and hopefully offering it to people to check out, we'll be showcasing a game that maybe not everybody else is. Now, this game was designed by newer designers, published by a newer publisher. There's a little more risk involved with something like that. However, I was impressed by the design and kind of the ambition behind it. And I think it's important sometimes to take that risk and help support designers and publishers get really unique games funded and put out there so that we can continue to grow our hobby in ways that we're all going to enjoy and find compelling. So I'll see when this game delivers if it lives up to its potential, and hopefully it's something that I'll be able to share with everybody over streaming. From there, I'm going to move to a game called Titan, which was on Kickstarter way back in November of 2019. This one was originally supposed to deliver in November of 2020. This is a game that I personally backed, and right now it's looking like it's finally going to deliver this month, in April of this year. Now, the publisher behind this is Holy Grail Games. They're probably best known for a couple of titles, Dominations and Museum. And the designer Matthew Potovin most recently had a game called Tiles of the Arabian Nights, which looked like a somewhat more engaging version of the old Tales of the Arabian Nights, but using kind of tile placement. Now, this game is basically a Euro, a medium-heavy to heavy Euro, and there were several expansions available for it. It's got a big kind of plastic modular board, and players are going to be building things on this board. They're essentially kind of space miners, and the various expansions added all kinds of different mechanics into it. So as someone who likes heavy Euros, I was really excited about this game at the time, back in 2019. I got sort of involved in Kickstarter, I'd say, as far as board games go, in maybe mid-2018. And that continued through mid-2019. And then in the second half of mid-2019 is probably where I ramped up and started backing more things more regularly. And this was probably in that initial 6-month period where I started backing more stuff. So this game really appealed to me because of its Euro elements. Also, it's very unique sort of modular board, this big plastic board, and all the construction that kind of happened within the Euro mechanics. But this is now, 3 years since I backed it. So when games take that long to deliver, this one I think ran into delays pre-pandemic, and whatever was going on behind the scenes, As the pandemic hit in 2020, things obviously snowballed for this one because it's taken until now to get this delivered. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it 3 years later. And that is a problem that can happen with Kickstarter. If you back something and it doesn't deliver for years, you may no longer be the same person or have the same gaming interests that you did when you backed it years before. I still like heavy Euros. I still like eclectic choices in games. This could be something that I still really enjoy, but we'll just have to see. Another very unique game is called Transcontinental. This one was on Kickstarter in December of 2020. It is a game that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in May of this year, I think. Although the designer, who's also the illustrator of the game, in February of this year, I believe it was February 14th, said that they were still waiting for the ships to leave port and he would do a new update once that happened. He hasn't even signed in to Kickstarter since then. I don't think that is a good tactic. Now, I understand that backers can sometimes get mad and be irate and kind of be touchy about things. There's a lot of bad blood on the internet, and certainly it bleeds through into Kickstarter as well. And I think when people are paying money and expecting to get something back, that can snowball. So I think there is an obligation for creators to, at the very least, stay up to date with communication. Every month is probably ideal. Every 2 months, probably at minimum, I think is where you need to communicate. And I think he is overdue for communication at this point. And considering the game was supposed to be delivering in April or May, we need something. Even if that's just him saying, hey, there's no more information, here's what's happening. I just need you to know that I haven't ghosted and run with the money. I think with everything that's happening, with all of the delays, all of the production chains, it's still a good idea to tell your backers, hey, I'm still here, this is still happening. Even if I don't have information, I'll let you know, and I just need to keep checking back in. I think that's what people should be doing on Kickstarter as creators. Now, I'm not really worried about a worst case scenario in this case. I believe that the game is being shipped, will be delivered, and let's talk about the game because it's pretty cool and very unique and why I backed it in the first place. I just think that there needs to be better communication. So this is a train game, but it's a very, very unique train game. It essentially has players building train tracks along a straight line. So it's not a board where you're kind of doing pick up and deliver all over the place. You are building these delivery routes one way and then you turn around and you come back. But there's a lot of interesting choices based on where you deliver, because there are tiles kind of below and above the train tracks. And there are a lot of clever mechanics in how the train moves when you reveal tiles, the way that you can make choices and how they affect other players. There's just a very interesting puzzle in there. I've always liked train games. I have a lot of them. So it's something that immediately does pique my interest. But the design of this game is so unlike every other train game out there. It's so unique and so specific to what it is. And when Glenn Dresser, he's the designer and the illustrator of this game, launched this campaign, it was obvious that there was a high degree of talent behind this, and a lot of development had already been done on the game. A lot of production choices had already been decided, and I was very excited by what I was seeing. So this, again, is the kind of game that I feel we need to back if we want to keep moving the needle and changing the landscape of gaming and having more interesting and better games getting produced. So I was very happy to back this one. I'm very excited for this game and what it does different from everything out there. And now it just needs to be delivered. And I think Glenn Dresser needs to increase the level of communication that he's been offering on the Kickstarter page. But hopefully we'll get the game this year, hopefully soon, and it will live up to its potential because it looks like it could be very, very cool. Now, next up is a game called Trudvang Legends, which has had its own very long storied development process. This was on Kickstarter in 2019. It's a game that I personally backed, and it went through many changes after the Kickstarter. They went back to the drawing board. They changed a lot of things around. They kind of redeveloped parts of it. It is now finally supposed to deliver soon, I believe in July, but it originally was going to deliver all in one piece, everything all at once. Now that has been split into separate shipments. CMON, who's the company behind this, and this always felt like a very different kind of game for them, but it still does have storytelling and miniatures, and there's a lot going on. So in some ways, it does have some similarities with other CMON games, but it's also very different. And the amount that they kind of had to go back and redevelop and redesign it was also different. And I think a lot of people got very nervous about that. So now that they're delivering it in 2 parts, they actually have not added on shipping to the backers. They're just kind of covered on their end. But it also means that the backers will not be getting the game in full probably this year. I think we'll get the core game in July, and then all of the extras, including some extras that you'll want to use with that core game, won't come until a Wave 2. And I don't think that they've actually announced when that Wave 2 will be shipping yet. So this is going to be a long delivery process kind of spread out over a period of time. Now, what intrigued me about it is that it is a campaign story game based on a Swedish RPG called Trudvang Chronicles. It's a storytelling cooperative game with miniatures. Again, that's kind of a sweet spot for my fiance Kristen and I, because we like to play games together and be a team and work on things together. And we both really like stories. So we like having a good narrative storytelling experience while we work on solving problems together. It's also a game that is kind of divided by sagas, and it's got campaigns to it. And the choices that your characters make and the achievements that they fulfill will change future sagas. So that's another thing that I like in games, when your choices continue on and you can build a character over a period of time, over a story, as they continue to evolve. I like seeing that change in the character, and I like seeing how those changes then inform changes in gameplay and evolutions of gameplay. So this one I was very excited about initially. When all of this kind of redesign happened, I kind of had to just withdraw emotionally from it and let it happen. A lot of people, I think, were very upset because there was so much redesign happening on such a deep level. I think it made people very nervous. But we are finally at the point where this game is being delivered, and we'll get to see what they finally came up with and what kind of game it is and how good it is. And again, I think this is going to be another game that will be perfect to stream and share with viewers and kind of experience it together as a part of a larger group. Vagrantsong is another campaign game. However, this one is supposed to be a retail game. But there's a lot of confusion about this one. It's produced by a company called Weird Miniatures. They've done a few games in the past, but I don't think anything has hugely blown up for them. This might be that game. So the first version of the game was supposed to have already come out. And if you look on like Board Game Geek, it says that it was released in March 2022. However, I have been all over sites like Card House, Cool Stuff Inc., Game Nerds, Miniature Market for months, constantly checking back in on this game. They have never had any copies in stock. I know that Weird Miniatures, through their own site, did a pre-order for a second edition. You can no longer pre-order that edition, so that has been closed. Yet the first edition, I don't think, at least in North America, I don't think it ever really released, except for possibly a few people who had pre-ordered copies. And it's possible that those came out and people have them in their hands. But it doesn't seem like there were ever any extra copies for anyone to purchase. So this is a game that technically is supposed to have already had their first edition released and is now producing a second edition, yet it seems in North America like it's impossible to get. So I think it will be available later this year. It's a game that I really would like to purchase, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to do so later this year. But the information on it is really not specific and vague, and I think part of that may be because it's already kind of blown up beyond what Weird Miniatures was expecting or what they were maybe ready to handle. We'll see if I can get a copy of the first edition or the second edition when those finally hit regular retail channels, or at least online retail channels. Or maybe I'll need to wait for the third edition to go on pre-order. We'll see. but it's a cooperative, story-driven boss battler using action points, and it's set on a supernatural ghost train. It's got 20 plus scenarios. The campaign is supposed to be 30 plus hours long. It doesn't have miniatures on it. It's not a game that went to Kickstarter, so there's not all this kind of bloat to it. And instead they're using little standees, kind of clear standees with character art that is, I'm not sure if it's heat transferred or how they've put it on there, but the art has gone onto these, clear standees. And I like it. I think it's a great solution. The art really pops. It looks really pretty for what it is. And the theme, this kind of supernatural ghost train, is intriguing to me. And I think it's, again, a game that, because it's got this campaign element and it's cooperative, I think it's something that Kristen and I are really going to enjoy playing together. And it's a game that I'll enjoy streaming eventually. But the availability and the kind of delivery window on this game is just TBA. We don't know at this point in time. Hopefully the supply will eventually catch up to the demand and they'll be able to get this game produced in a way that it will be available to people who want to play it, because I'm one of those people. And I think it looks really cool. And it's a game that I'd eventually like to be able to share with people, because I think it's going to be a game that, at least for a while, is going to be harder to acquire. Just period. But I do think it's a game that's going to have a lot of appeal and people are going to be interested in. So hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on it this year and show it to people, and then more people will be able to get it as those supply chains open up and they're able to make more copies of the game available. Vengeance, Roll and Fight, episodes 1 and 2 was on Kickstarter in May of 2021. This is one that I personally backed, and right now it's supposed to deliver in June of this year. Now, this was a co-design from Gordon Kaleha, who runs Mighty Boards, the publisher. He's worked on such games as Excavation Earth, Posthuman Saga, and the original Vengeance, which I've heard really, really good things about. But the original Vengeance was a game that had a lot of miniatures and used action points. And you essentially were going into a situation where you're fighting as a samurai, and all these miniatures would kind of get set up on a board, and then you'd go through that and you'd use your action points to try to take everybody out. I think where the game was critiqued was that the miniatures were kind of even more cosmetic than they normally are in games, because no players were using them. They weren't moving around or doing anything. You would literally just set them up at the beginning of the game and then try to kill them and remove them from the board when you do. But it's largely a solo game. So it felt like a lot of price tag and a lot of bloat and just a lot of game for something that was essentially a solo game and didn't really need all of these miniatures that were purely cosmetic and kind of didn't add too much to the game. Like, it would be very easy to make that game into a phone game and, just have little tokens on your phone screen and kind of go through and take your actions and play through your campaign and try to beat the level. So even though the original Vengeance was a game that really intrigued me, it was a game that I didn't feel like I wanted to pick up because I didn't want to spend that much money on this solo game with all of these miniatures that were just cosmetic. When I saw that they were doing essentially a roll and write version, I perked up. And I like Gordon Kalea, I like his designs. I also like David Turksey, and he is one of the co-designers along with Nora Lee Lubbers. So it's a 3-person design team on this one. It's got art by Axel Torvenius, who was the art on the original Vengeance, and he has a very colorful comic book art style that works really well with this. And I'm happy that they kept him, for the roll and write version. The one thing that makes me a little bit wary is that it is a real-time game. And I'm not a huge fan of real-time games, but I decided with this one to take a risk and try it out. But what players are going to be doing is rolling dice, and as they place dice, they'll kind of open up space in their dice hand, and they'll be able to take on more dice and then kind of re-roll those. So they're doing this in real time. They're trying to acquire dice, place dice to be able to take action with later. And the game is kind of a combination of this dice placement mechanic along with roll and write mechanics. And I like the people behind it a lot. And it seemed like it was doing something a little bit different. It had a much smaller price tag on it because it is a roll and write. and there are different kind of storylines involved. You've got episodes 1 and 2. You can also combine them and make it into an 8-player game, or up to an 8-player game, which is pretty cool. It can almost kind of function at that level, I think, as like a party game or a filler game. And I think roll and writes in general are really good for higher player counts. I've also been trying to add in a few more roll and writes to my collection. I do have David's previous roll and write game called Roman Roll, which is a really, really, really good game, but I think it probably would have been better designed as just a straight Euro. A lot of the roll and write mechanics in that, using dry erase boards, it feels mechanically too complicated for the game. Like there's just too much going on with all of the writing and erasing. And I think they could have developed that game and designed that game not using roll and write mechanics. So it may be my favorite roll and write game. I think that it would just be a better game if it wasn't even a roll and write game. But I do like David. I like his designs. He does a lot of solo modes, and he's designed a lot of games that I really love, including some of the games with the Mind Clash team, like Anachrony. So I'm a huge fan of David's. I like Mighty Boards. I like Gordon Kaleha. Hopefully this one will be as good as I'm hoping it will be when it arrives soon. As far as delivery goes, the last communication from them was in March, and they said that they would update when the ship has left China. They haven't done that yet. It's only been a few weeks though, so I'm not as worried. But I think it's going to take 3 to 4, maybe 6 weeks for the ship to get here. And then even with the distributors who are distributing games once they're here, there's a backup with a lot of those. So I don't know when we'll get it. Hoping for June, but I think if it gets delayed a month or 2, that's no big deal. And there's no way that it should not be delivered in 2022. Verdant was a game that was fairly recently on Kickstarter in October of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in September of this year. Now, this one I backed largely for my fiance, Kristen. She loves plants. She has a very green thumb. We have a lot of plants around our apartment. In fact, we got a welcome mat last year that says, "Hope you like plants," because we have so many plants. And Verdant is a houseplant themed game. It has mechanics like drafting, so you can be drafting different kinds of cards and then playing them into a tableau and just doing different things to score cards in different ways. Set collection, sure. A very kind of basic collection of mechanics that we've seen in a lot of other games. Usually it makes for fairly solid, mechanically lighter type gameplay. And I like those games. There's just a lot of them. It's kind of a question of which ones are you going to bring into your collection, because you don't need 10 or 20 of those games, and there are a lot of those kinds of games out there. So for me, it was definitely the houseplant theme that pushed this one over the edge, because I know it will really appeal to Kristen. It's also designed by a really solid design team. It's like 3 or 4 people. I know Molly Johnson is one of them. I don't want to name all of them, Stan Stankiewicz, because I don't remember all of the designers off the top of my head, but there's 3 or 4 of them. And they've worked together on Dollars to Donuts, Point Salad, Truffle Shuffle, and Public Market. It's also being published by Flat Out Games, who did Calico and Cascadia. So there's a lot of really solid games in that group of designers and publisher. And then on top of that, it's got art by Beth Sobel, who I've already mentioned in this video when I was talking about Three Sisters. And Beth is just one of those artists who has such good art that elevates the games. She's worked on Arboretum, Calico, Cascadia, both of those Flat Out Games titles, as well as Viticulture and Wingspan. And so I think the combination of Beth doing a game with houseplants, my fiance is going to love it. I mean, it's basically Wingspan with plants, although mechanically it is lighter than Wingspan. It's kind of more about tableau building, and I don't think there are quite as many mechanics as in Wingspan when you're doing all the things with the eggs and playing the birds and all that. So it's a game of lighter complexity, but it has amazing Beth Sobel art with all these great plants. It's gorgeous looking, and I think it's going to be a huge hit with Kristen. Vivid Memories is another game that has already delivered. So this was on Kickstarter in May of 2021. I did personally back it, and it delivered in January of this year. Now, this one was a co-design between Matthew Dunstan and Brett Gilbert. They've worked together before on Chocolate Factory, which is a game that I almost backed and I think looks really, really good, and Elysium. And a lot of people really like Elysium. I think that's a game that kind of flew under the radar, but the more you talk to people, the more you'll find out how many people really like Elysium. So I knew that the design team behind this one was solid. It also has art from Andrew Bosley, who I've also mentioned in this video, but he's probably best known for his work on Everdell, Merchants of the Dark Road, and Tapestry. And he just has very colorful, vibrant art with these really engaging, fun characters. I think that's a lot of the reason that Everdell became as successful as it did, was it was kind of appealing to family gamers and kind of medium lighter gamers, but it had this art that really propelled it. And that's all Andrew. He's awesome. So this game has player boards that are shaped like brains, and players are drafting these plastic pieces, we'll call them tokens, and they're drafting them off of a series of tiles. And the way it works is that players can either draft 1 to 3 tokens. If they draft 1 token, then when they place it on the board, they'll be able to reorder some of their other pieces. Or they can draft 2 tokens of the same color or 3 tokens of all different colors. But they're going to be placing them on this player board that looks like a brain. They'll be moving them around sometimes based on other actions, and they'll be trying to get those tokens to link different areas of the sides of the boards to score endgame points. At the end of every round, they also have 4 player powers that are kind of spread over the top of the board. And they'll be able to use those to, again, adjust some of those tokens in their brain. But they will also be acquiring tiles. So whenever a player takes the last tokens from one of the tiles that is present that round, they'll also get the tile. The tile will allow them to score points, but it will also give them a different ability. And so in the round where they score it, they'll be able to use the ability on the tile instead of one of their 4 main abilities. It's not a very complicated game to teach or to play, but it is remarkably crunchy in the decision-making process. It's a game where I think you kind of sit there and stare at it and almost get lost in the choices, which I don't mind. I actually kind of enjoy that, and I find it very thinky and fun, and I like having that in a game that mechanically is not that difficult. So it's a game where you can take it with you traveling. It's a smaller box. It's not super small, but it's not, your kind of normal square calyx size box. It's smaller than that, so it's sort of portable. It's very easy to teach and very easy to play, and yet you still have that kind of complex decision-making think space within it, which I really appreciate. So I like having a game that has that decision-making, yet it's a smaller, portable game. And it's published by Floodgate Games, who are probably best known for Fog of Love and the Sagrada series. So I think people need to be aware of that kind of thinky space in this one, because it's possible that it could just trigger people who are very AP prone. But apart from that, it's a really interesting, good game with a very unique theme and gameplay that's kind of different from other things that are out there. And I believe that the retail version of the game, I think it's going to retail, I don't think it'll be that different from the Kickstarter version. Weather Machine is a game by Vital Lacerda, who is probably my favorite designer, period. So this one was an easy back for me. I knew I was going to back it. It was on Kickstarter in December of 2021. It's a game that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in November of this year. Now, if you've played any of these kind of big box Vital Lacerda games, like Escape Plan, The Gallerist, Lisboa, Venus, On Mars, to name a few, those are all designed by Vital Lacerda, and they all have art by Ian O'Toole. And I love Ian O'Toole's art, and I think it works so well in Vital's games because Ian does not only the art, but the graphic design. And usually when you're playing the game, these are heavy Euros, but there's always things on the board that represent how things work. And usually the more you play these games, the more you kind of familiarize yourself with the board and the iconography. It's always giving you surprises. It's always giving you information The more you play it, where you're like, aha, that makes complete sense that this mechanic would work this way. And the iconography for this makes even more sense now. It's just so intuitive and natural. Now, his games are heavy games, so it often takes a play or two, I think, for players to get their feet with them. And so the iconography may not be that intuitive or may not feel that intuitive from the jump. But once you've played it a few times, you kind of keep making those connections that makes the game feel lighter the more you play it, and also more immersive, and just creates a great gaming experience. So I knew I was going to want to play this one. It's got action points, tile placement, worker placement, a lot of the mechanics that you usually find in Vital Lacerda games. But the theme here is a little bit different and very cool. Essentially, players are assistants, and they're in the employ of this brilliant scientist who is worried about climate change, and he's trying to create machines that will adjust weather effects, weather cycles, and things like that for the future. However, he's having to create these things in very experimental ways, very experimental methodology, and a lot of things keep going wrong. And so it does remind me a little bit of CO2, which is another Vital Lacerda game with art by Ian O'Toole, which was about creating green power plants to replace carbon-based power plants and save the world from pollution. This feels a little bit like that because it's got that, trying to plan for the future and preserve the future, but it's also got this element of a crazy scientist, and the things that he's doing and creating while being brilliant are also not completely thought through. And so players are going to need to constantly kind of make adjustments and control the damage. And in that sense, it reminds me of games like Anachrony, which is another very complex game with high production values. And in that game, players are essentially sending resources to themselves from the past, and then they need to go into the past to create those resources. So there's a very interesting kind of logic puzzle in Anachrony. And I think there's something similar in this one, where, based on what the scientist does, you then kind of have to do damage control after the fact. In the Kickstarter, they talk about the butterfly effect. And I think that's a theme as well that's always very interesting to me. The fact that you can do one thing, and then later on you have to deal with the karma and the fallout and doing damage control. And sometimes what you do may lead to more damage control being necessary. It can become kind of a cascading effect. So thematically, I was very excited about this, and it's by my favorite designer with one of my favorite artists. So this one was an easy insta-back for me, and I'm really looking forward to playing this game later in the year. I have a feeling, based on what I've seen from the theme and also the components in it, which are just gorgeous, that this one will probably rise to the top of my Vital Lacerda list. And right now, again, he is my favorite designer. My favorite 3 games of his are Lisboa, Kanban EV, and On Mars. So I'm anticipating that it's going to unseat at least one of those, but we'll see once I get it and play it where it kind of ranks in. Now, Wild Serengeti is another game that I knew my fiance would be very interested in, and it appealed to me in other ways because the gameplay is kind of unique. It was on Kickstarter in September of 2021. It is a game that I personally backed, and it is currently slated to deliver in May. And I've gotten some notifications about that, so I don't think that there'll be any delays with that. I believe it will actually deliver in May. It's designed by Gunho Kim, who did a game called Shaolia Warring States. That game just barely funded, and then it delivered. People played it. They really liked it. It was a kind of simple tableau builder and resource management game, but from what I've heard, it was just very, very good for what it is, sort of a lighter game. So they came back, they did a sequel Kickstarter, that did fairly well. And the publisher here is called Bad Comet. I think it's Gunho Kim's company. It's out of South Korea. So I knew his track record. I knew that Shaolia Warring States was a game that probably underperformed on crowdfunding, but the more people are finding it, the more its reputation is growing. And mechanically, it's got action drafting, pattern building, set collection, and variable player powers. So again, it's a lighter game. There's nothing going on here that's revolutionary, except for this, except for thematically, because it takes place in the Serengeti with all of these wonderful African animals, and the meeples for this game are amazing. The shapes for them, the colors, I think a lot of people would probably want to back this game just to get the meeples. They're things that you could easily just put up on your shelves as tchotchkes and, create a little scene. They're that cool. But in the game, what you're going to be doing is you are trying to arrange the various animals to take pictures of them and, sort of display them in different montages. And I've always liked that. I've always liked cameras in games. I've always liked the idea that you're playing a first-person shooter where you're not killing anything. You're shooting them with the camera because you want to take their picture. It made me really like a game called Beyond Good and Evil. But I've always liked that idea of taking pictures. It's also something that I really liked in a game called No Man's Sky, which had all kinds of critical reception and public feedback all over the map. But I really liked that game, and part of it is just going out there and seeing all the things and kind of documenting it. So I like the idea that this isn't a board game, and I really like the idea that it's being done from this kind of positive place where you're trying to take pictures of things, you're not shooting anything, and it's all being done with these just really colorful, amazing animal meeples. Now, the last game on this list, and the last game in this very long series, which has now taken me months to produce, is The Witcher Old World. This is a game that was on Kickstarter in June of 2021. I did personally back it, and right now it is slated to deliver in December of this year. It's on this list because it's slated to deliver in December of this year. However, when you look at the fact that almost every game has had delays because of production and delivery chains and things like that, I think it's probably unlikely that they'll actually get it delivered in December. I mean, who knows? They may be completely on top of things. They may be solving problems before they happen, and they may make that date. But it's been rare within the last year or two that people are making that initial target date. Now, what's really interesting to me is that this version of The Witcher, and I've watched the Netflix show, which I really like, with Henry Cavill. I've played the first game almost up into the end, because then the Mac that I was using to emulate the game kind of crashed, so I haven't been able to completely finish The Witcher. And I've dinked around a little bit on Witcher 3, but I need to get in there and play it proper. I would like to have played all of 1 and 2, but that became a problem with my Mac to play those 2 games. I was hoping they would eventually reissue them on PlayStation, because that's how I play my video games, although I haven't played too many video games in the last year or 2 or 3. But I was hoping that they would do a reissue for PlayStation that's a little bit more stable. I don't know if that's going to happen, so I think I just need to dig into Witcher 3. My point with all of that is I do have some experience with the IP. I have played at least one of the games almost all the way through. I have watched the show. So I like the IP a lot. I like the way it takes these fantasy tropes, but it uses them in this kind of low magic universe, and it's kind of gritty. Now, I think most people, when they hear about a game like this, they would expect some kind of narrative campaign game. There's miniatures in this too, so that probably doubly makes people expect that it's going to be a narrative campaign game. The Witcher Old World is not. It is a competitive game, and players are going to be pursuing different things within a game, and once they achieve somewhere between 6 to 8 achievements, it may depend on the length of the game, that will determine the winner. So it's a competitive game, but it does have kind of several different expansions that you can throw into it and add more variability and more things to it. Also fairly impressive is the fact that this game is designed by Lukas Wozniak, who's Polish. He worked on a couple other games. One is called Titans, which is not the game that I talked about earlier. That was called Titan. He did a game called Titans, which is kind of this miniature skirmish game. He also worked on a game called Valhalla. but he's kind of a lone man operation. And while he did do a couple games previously, he hadn't done anything on the scale of The Witcher, certainly not with this kind of IP. However, I've heard good things about his other games. So I was impressed by the fact that he had done whatever he needed to do to get this IP. And right out of the gate, when this Kickstarter launched, there was a lot of ambition behind it. There was a lot of high level of production and scale behind it. It's very impressive. So again, this is somebody who I want to encourage and I want to help be able to continue making games, because right out of the gate, he's already making stuff from a very high level of quality. It also certainly doesn't hurt that the art is by Damien Mamalidi, who's worked on games like Brass Birmingham, Brass Lancashire, Edge of Darkness, Radlands, and Tyrants of the Underdark. Damien has a style that's very dark, both in terms of the lighting, like his art often looks dark physically, but also dark themes. And he's one of the best artists, I think, working in that sphere. Just very appealing art. The game has miniatures, it's got dual layered player boards, it's got custom dice, everything that you'd want out of a production from a CMON or something like that. But this is this guy out of Poland who's made a couple fairly well-received games, but nothing on this scale, yet he somehow got the IP for this and is producing this amazing looking game. It's got deck building mechanics. I'm a huge fan of deck building, and it's got a solo mode, and I'm just very much looking forward to this. I'm not worried about it at all, even though it's kind of dependent on this single individual, because he's done such a good job on everything and just the running of this campaign. So I'm very excited for The Witcher Old World. If it does manage to get delivered this year, I think it'll be one of a short list of games that people will be talking about during the holidays. And if it doesn't, they'll be talking about it whenever it does deliver. Now that really wraps up this video in this series, and I would like to thank you very much for watching. If you've just kind of discovered this with this video, maybe consider going back, starting at the beginning in video 1. And I will have all of the different videos linked below so that you can just click on any of them and go right to that video and start watching wherever you want. If you want to see my honorable mentions, you can start with video 1. If you want to see me talking about expansions and later editions or remakes of other games, you can look at videos 2 and 3. And if you just want to see my top 100 most anticipated games of 2022, starting from the beginning alphabetically, you'll want to start with video 4. Again, please consider liking and subscribing. And before I sign off here, I'd like to talk very quickly about the future of this channel. So I'm actually getting married in June 17th, which has been a long time coming. We've been engaged for 3 years now. We were originally going to get married back in 2020, and then the pandemic happened. We are not yet ready to have kind of big receptions with hundreds of people, so we're doing a very small, tiny ceremony at a house that we rented in Malibu, and that's going to be in June. So in the months leading up to that, the next 2 months, what I'm planning to do with this channel is keep up with the Kickstarter weekly videos. I'll continue running my website, Think Outside the Board, where I do daily posts on all of the crowdfunding projects that premiered the previous day. And then I'll be doing a little catch up on my Game of the Month videos, which I tapered off on somewhere around October or November of last year. So I have maybe half a dozen of those videos to catch up on. So I'll be doing those videos, the Kickstarter weeklies, and then behind the scenes, I'm going to be upgrading my equipment and finishing my studio space upstairs. I will probably come back with Think Outside the Board 2.0 in terms of what I'm doing and the quality of what I'm putting out after my wedding. So think July and August. At that point, I'm going to be producing a series covering my top 30 games of 2020. And until I do, I still have a few games I need to finish playing from 2020. I will then roll into my top 300 games of all time. And for that, I will be joined by my friend Ryan Everly, who has very different tastes than I do. I will likely do my top 300 games, and he will likely join me for the top 50. And so not only will you get my top 50 games, you'll get his top 50 games, which are really eclectic and interesting. And I think a really good counterpoint to the stuff that I like. And we'll certainly be talking about each other's choices. Once I finish that series, I will then launch into my top 30 games of 2021. And then as we go into 2023, next year, I'll be doing my top 30 games of 2022. Now, before I get there, while I'm doing that big 300 game series, I will probably also launch a Patreon. Part of the reason for that isn't necessarily to make money right off the bat, but I do want to have a forum where people can have a voice and vote on the kind of content that I'm making. One thing that I'm thinking of doing is making some shorter videos for TikTok. I'm not really planning on making videos to advertise games. I'm not pursuing a path where you'll see me on crowdfunding pages for games. I don't want to be advertising for other people. So I'm kind of using a different tactic, which is to just directly appeal to you all, to gamers. And so I want your opinion and feedback in terms of the kinds of content that I'm making. So if I do produce some content for TikTok down the line, it will most likely be very short video reviews, like 1-minute video reviews. And I think that'll also help me kind of grow my YouTube channel. And then as we get into the late part of the year and next year, I'll be doing a lot more teach and review videos, and also hopefully launching the Twitch channel that I've been talking about throughout this video, where I'll be streaming games and all kinds of games. I'll have different nights for different kinds of games. There'll be solo stuff, there'll be cooperative games, there'll be big campaign games. And again, as I'm doing that, I definitely will want feedback from you all in terms of not only what type of games that I'm showing, but specifically, if I'm doing a campaign game, what campaign games you want to see next. So I'm planning on using the Twitch channel in conjunction with the Patreon to accomplish that. So that's kind of what's happening bigger picture. Again, the next 2 months are just going to be me preparing for my wedding, me getting the upstairs studio space up and ready, getting new equipment in, improving the look of the channel, and catching up on those Game of the Month videos. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you very, very soon. Look out for my next Kickstarter Weekly, which should be up within the next day or two. Take care, play lots of great games, and I'll be talking to you about what games I've been playing and what I think about those games in my Kickstarter Weekly videos. See you soon.